What's up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. You can probably tell from whatever thumbnail I put on this video that this is a little different than my normal conspiracy debunking content. And that's because we have to talk about voting and how Trump and the entire right-wing machine is setting up to steal this election. Looking into right-wing media as much as I do, this is something I've been worried about for a while. But due to recent events and law changes, I want to share this information with you, just so you know exactly what we're up against come November 3rd. This is probably the most important video I've ever done, so if you do get anything out of it, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. You know the deal. Help me get it out to more people. Alright, let's hop in. One of the things most talked about by pundits and other people on the left is a scenario called the Red Mirage, wherein if Trump is ahead on election night, but then Biden pulls ahead because of mail-in voting, that Trump might not accept the outcome of the election. And we'll get to mail-in voting in a bit because it's important. But there's another scenario that scares me just a little bit more, and it has to do with Election Day. In 1981, the RNC formed a group of what I can only assume are total LARPers called the National Security Ballot Task Force. What did this task force do, you ask? Well, they went to polling places with armbands with the task force name on them and guns and engaged in serious voter intimidation. This took place in New Jersey, and of course the official reason that the RNC said they created the task force was for them to be poll watchers. But they engaged in so much voter intimidation on election day that the RNC had to enter into a consent decree as part of a lawsuit that they would not engage in any more poll watching operations. Now, why does any of this matter? Well, because that consent decree that has stopped Republicans from engaging in massive voter intimidation for the last 30-some years expired in 2018. So this will be the first national election without it in place. And Trump and the Republicans have been preparing and getting ready to use it for months. The Trump administration is planning on having 50,000 poll watchers in 15 key swing states. In Philadelphia alone, they're planning on having 1,600. Wonder why? Poll watchers can do things like challenge ballots or voter eligibility. In Michigan, poll watchers have been instructed to record anytime there's a paper jam. Now, poll watchers are not supposed to interact with voters directly, but I have zero confidence in that happening in practice, especially when the Trump campaign is putting out ads like this.
The radical left are laying the groundwork to steal this election from my father, President Donald Trump. They are planting stories that President Trump will have a landslide lead on election night, but will lose when they finish counting the mail-in ballots. Their plan is to add millions of fraudulent ballots that can cancel your vote and overturn the election. We cannot let that happen. We need every able-bodied man, woman to join Army for Trump's election security operation at defendyourballot.com. We need you to help us watch them, not just on Election Day, but also during early voting and at the counting boards. President Trump is going to win. Don't let them steal it. Go to defendyourballot.com and enlist today.
Well, kind of sounds like I'm signing up for some kind of army. Now, take a whole bunch of Trump supporters that are so diehard that they signed up for a poll-watching task force and drill into their heads that Democrats are going to do everything they can to steal this election and add millions upon millions of ballots. This is an obvious plan to cause chaos at the polls, and unfortunately there's other right-wing groups that are adding to that 50,000 number the Trump administration put out. Other right-wing groups like the Honest Election Project and True the Vote are also recruiting poll watchers for early voting and election day. Side note, one of True the Vote's biggest donors is Richard Sackler of Purdue Pharma. You know, the people that marketed OxyContin as a non-addictive painkiller and got millions of people hooked because doctors gave it out like candy. But anyway, that's another video. True the Vote has gotten in trouble for voter intimidation in the past. In 2010, they were accused of doing things during the midterms like hovering over voters, blocking lines of people trying to vote, and getting in poll workers' faces. They like to use ex-cops and ex-military for these poll-watching campaigns. They call it Continue to Serve. The Intercept published a couple recordings of the leader of the group explaining why.
You want to talk about people who understand and respect law and order and chain of command. You get some SEALs in those polls, and they're going to say, no, this is what it says, and this is how we're going to play this show. And that's what we need. We need people who are unafraid to call it like they see it all the way down the line.
That meeting was back in February. They've been recruiting for a while. And I don't think I have to tell you how several ex-cops who potentially have guns patrolling and hovering over and intimidating voters in downtown Philadelphia could go bad. There have already been a few issues at polling places in Virginia and in Philadelphia, which Trump mentioned at the debates, but the issue in Philadelphia was totally overblown because all that happened was poll watchers showed up at a satellite polling place, which is illegal, and the people at the polling place told them they couldn't be there. But even though they did exactly what the law says to do, it still became a right-wing talking point, and the president mentioned it at the debates. Now, if this nationwide voter intimidation tactic disguised as a poll-watching effort was the only thing we had to worry about, I wouldn't be too concerned about Donald Trump stealing the election. But unfortunately, there's several other layers to this. For instance, it's been the policy of the Department of Justice for the past 40 years not to publicly announce any investigations into voting-related crimes for fear it might tilt the election. But last Friday, the DOJ issued a memo saying they will publicly announce investigations like this if it has to do with postal workers or military personnel. But one expert says that the way the memo is written, it could be used for other investigations. They've actually already broke from this norm once when they announced last month that they were looking into a case in Pennsylvania that had to do with 9 ballots. And of course, right-wing media took that story and announced mass voter fraud. Look, they're trying to steal the election from Trump. When in actuality, it just amounted to a little bit of human error. All indications point to this being a small fuck-up, not some mass voter fraud scheme. Which is why normally we don't announce these things publicly, because now most people don't see the second story, they only see the first story, especially the Trump supporters. They see mass voter fraud against Trump in Pennsylvania, and that's the story that's in their head that they stick with. So now if 4 ballots go missing because some postal worker fucked up, a DOJ lawyer is going to get on TV and say, we're looking into allegations of widespread voter fraud in Wisconsin, and then Tim Pool's going to get on YouTube and say to cancel the election or some shit. And that's the other big part in this equation to make it possible for Trump to steal the election, is the conservative media machine just pushing out that, well, obviously Trump was cheated. Obviously Trump and his campaign have been pushing that the Democrats are going to rig the election, but every level of conservative media has too, from Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson to people like Tim Pool and Candace Owens. Even conservative TikTok has been pushing the mail-in voting is full of fraud, and that's why the Democrats want it, because they're going to steal the election narrative. And of course, right-wing provocateurs like James O'Keefe and Jacob Wohl have been getting in on the mix as well. Jacob Wohl and his partner in crime, Jack Burkman, are actually facing felony charges for their role in a robocall scandal that was discouraging people from voting by mail. They sent out this message to at least 85,000 people, mostly in Detroit.
But did you know that if you vote by mail, your personal information will be part of a public database that will be used by police departments to track down old warrants and be used by credit card companies to collect outstanding debts? The CDC is even pushing to use records for mail-in voting to track people for mandatory vaccines. Don't be finessed into giving your private information to the man. Stay safe and beware of vote by mail.
The funniest part about that scandal is that Jack Burkman actually used his own phone number to register the robocall account they used. And as far as James O'Keefe, he did another one of his sting operations, claiming there was massive illegal ballot harvesting, as well as cash for ballots tied to Ilhan Omar in Minnesota. But that turned out to not exactly be the case. First, the ballot harvesting they claim was illegal wasn't, and the guy they filmed didn't even work for Ilhan Omar. But it gets even better. Turns out they deceptively edited the guy in the video to make it look like he was doing something shady. And the person they claim was the insider working with Project Veritas offered that guy $10,000 to say he worked with Ilhan Omar. Even for Project Veritas, honestly, this was a reach. But of course the problem is that even though it's a baseless accusation, it's already been tweeted out by people like Don Jr., tons of other conservative influencers. It has over 1 million views on YouTube. Hell, the president even mentioned it in his Duluth rally.
And what about Omar, where she gets caught harvesting? What the hell is going on? I hope your U.S. attorney is involved.
Yep, nothing to see here. Just the president of the United States pushing completely baseless conspiracy theories that are undermining the people's confidence in our elections. You know, everyday stuff. Now, none of this on its own could steal Trump the election. But when you combine a massive voter intimidation campaign in swing states that, given the current discourse, could turn ugly or at least cause massive confusion, add in Bill Barr and the DOJ that has 4 more weeks to announce investigations over small ballot errors, furthering conservatives' distrust of the vote, and then of course sprinkle on top conservative media in all forms complaining that Trump had to have been robbed, there's no way the Dems won this election. Put that all together and you have the potential for the nightmare scenario that even if Joe Biden actually wins the election, he'll still lose, and here's why. Now, what usually happens is whoever wins the state gets that state's electoral votes. But that's not actually written in the Constitution. I mean, because why the fuck would you write something like that down? I mean, right? Each state actually has the ability to award their electoral votes to whoever they want. And this could play out a couple ways. So let's say, for instance, that a couple of the poll watchers in Dade County, Florida, which is one of the largest counties, complains of suspicious activity. And then say maybe one of the poll watchers gets in a fight with one of the voters and they either have to suspend voting or shut one of the polling places down. And then the next day the governor comes out and says, well, you know, we had accusations of suspicious activity, and we also maybe had some issues with mail-in voting. So we don't feel secure that we had a proper election. So we are going to award our electoral votes to President Trump. They would be completely in their right to do that. Now, of course, something like that would come with legal challenges, but it's important to note that during the 2000 Bush v. Gore case, the Supreme Court held that a state can pretty much do what it wants with its electoral votes. And seeing as Republicans control the entire government in Florida, it could flip Florida back red. Now, a more likely scenario is that Republicans cause just enough chaos in a few states where neither candidate gets 270 electoral votes. In that situation, each state would get 1 vote for president. And seeing as Republicans control 26 state governments, they would have the exact number needed to get the election. Now, maybe this sounds a bit off the rails to you, but it's important to remember that neither Trump or Pence has committed to a peaceful transfer of power. And a legal advisor for the Trump campaign said this on the record: if there was any hint of voting irregularity, Republican states just might say this: we don't think the results of our state are accurate, so here's our slate of electors that we think properly reflect the results of our state. And honestly, the biggest question is not if Republicans would do something like this, because I'm 100% sure if they could get away with it, that they would do something like this. But the biggest question is this a bridge too far, even for Trump supporters? Would they support Trump and the Republicans, even if they did something as outlandish as this? And honestly, I mean, there's going to be some that won't, but I think it depends a lot on the messaging and what the exact situation is. Unfortunately, a lot of people treat politics like they do sports. I mean, if the Vikings win on Sunday, that's all I care about. I don't care if a couple calls that didn't go the other team's way were actually penalties, you know, whatever the situation is. As long as they win, I don't really care what the scenario is. They won. I'm happy. And unfortunately, that's kind of what our politics has devolved into. I think if conservative pundits throw out a couple of half-decent talking points and can find one video of a Mexican guy carrying 2 ballots, that might be enough for a lot of them. I spend a lot of time watching conservative content and seeing the reaction they get from their audience, and it's concerning to say the least. I think a good portion of GOP congressmen would actually get a boost from helping Trump stay in office and save the world from the angry, evil Democrats. Obviously, this scenario is not likely, but it is possible, which is why I wanted to share it with you guys. Truthfully, the thing I'm most worried about is the national poll watcher campaign in swing states. I think it's going to be a serious issue for slowing down the polls, which is why, if you can, vote early as possible, so that way the lines are shorter on election day. If you are mailing in your ballot, please do that as early as possible too, because the one issue with mail-in ballots is not fraud like the president would have you believe, but that they get rejected at a higher rate than regular ballots. 15 states allow for a process called vote curing, where if you mess up on your ballot in any way, they will send it back to you so you can fix any mistakes and then send it back in. But obviously you have to do this early so you have time to go through this process. If you live in South Carolina, you must now get a witness signature on your mail-in ballot in order for it to count. I really want to see Lindsey Graham gone, so let's get every vote counted in South Carolina. If you live in the extremely important state of Pennsylvania, in order for your mail-in ballot to count, you must use both envelopes that they send you. Otherwise, it's considered a naked ballot and it does not count. I'll have links in the description explaining all this stuff in greater detail if you need it. Also, you can actually still register to vote in a few states, so I'll have that information as well as other voting information and all my sources down in the description if you want to check them out. I made this video because I wanted to really break down the machine that we're up against. We are this close to the finish line and we don't need any fuck-ups because this election's just too important. Climate change, healthcare, gay marriage, the Supreme Court, women's rights. It's all on the ballot and we don't need any fuck-ups. We are dealing with the most slimy people in the world. The Mitch McConnells, the Bill Barrs, the Donald Trumps, and they will do anything to win. But we can't let that happen. We just have to go out, vote, and fucking win. Before we finish up, I want to give a big shout out to Gabby and Leanne for signing up to the progressive tier of my Patreon. Thank you guys so much. It really means a lot to me. If you like my content and want to support me making more in the future, consider signing up to my Patreon. It'll be the first link in the description. But if you can't do that, I'll definitely settle for a like, a share, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff, and definitely hit the bell for notifications if you want to see my content, because YouTube is not going to notify you when I make a new video unless you hit the bell. Also, you can follow me on my other social medias. I have a TikTok, a Twitter, Instagram, all that jazz. And I am going to be doing more live streams this week going over YouTube QAnon content. That's enough shameless plugs. Let's just go win this election. Thank you so much for watching, and peace.